Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to pull out a book from my library and talk to you about it. I've been doing this every once in a while, pulling out books and sharing stuff, but I think I should do it more often and pulling out some interesting books from the library and giving you a little taste of them. This is a fascinating book, and it has a lot to do with how things would go with the Abraham Lincoln administration. You know, it's a fascinating thing when you think about it, how many times in the Lincoln administration that things that were discussed by John Quincy Adams 20 some odd years earlier were becoming basically coming to fruition with the Lincoln administration. Well, there was a very strong connection between John Quincy Adams and Abraham Lincoln, and that was Abraham Lincoln's Secretary of State, William Seward. William Seward was a good friend of John Quincy Adams, and in fact, they did an awful lot of stuff in Congress together, and even at the time of John Quincy Adams' death, the individual who was asked to do the eulogy was William Seward. And William Seward also wrote a book on John Quincy Adams, which is right here. It's a fascinating book when you look at it. It's lots of information. Let me pull this out if I can. I was just reading through some of it again. I read every once in a while. I go through some of the book. This is the title page. And it originally came out in 1849. This is the 1851 edition. But it's a fascinating book, and it's interesting when you think of John Quincy Adams and the things that he was saying in the 1830s and the early 1840s pertaining to slavery, talking about possible civil war. And all of those things, if you think about it, kind of worked their way toward the Lincoln administration. And perhaps one of the more fascinating things was this. John Quincy Adams said, in the case of a civil war, the way you end slavery is to use the War Powers Act. And by golly, that's exactly what they did in the Lincoln administration. The Emancipation Proclamation, or the Proclamation of Emancipation, was basically a War Powers Act, exactly as John Quincy Adams suggested. And you can be sure that William Seward carefully worked with Lincoln and explained some of these things and shared these things that became part of the Lincoln legacy, which is so deeply connected to John Quincy Adams. I think that's rather fascinating. So this is one of the books from my library, and it's a fascinating book, written many, many years ago by William Seward, who would become Lincoln's Secretary of State and who was a good friend of John Quincy Adams. Thank you.